So this video is going to show you how I draw, and I know that a lot of artists draw this way. I was taught to draw this way. Some tutorials will show you to draw a circle and then a triangle and then maybe a rectangle and a trapezoid. But this doesn't work for a variety of reasons. Depending on the direction your reference is facing, the lighting, it's always going to be a bit different, and it's not always going to stay in those parameters of a perfect circle or a perfect shape. So what you want to do is be able to see things, how they relate to each other. So what I did in this Procreate canvas is I imported an image that I want to work from, and it's a photo of a robin that I took probably a couple of months ago. And I'm just going to start drawing. And what I want to look for is the relationship of points of interest between other points of interest. So for example, I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm just going to show you with a white line where I'm going to be looking. So if I draw a line right down here and make that a perfect line, it's not straight, so let's draw another one. Let's draw a straight line going up. And I'm looking at this point of interest right here. And I'm seeing where that is in relation to, for example, this point up here, and also this point right here, which is the middle of the beak. So this seems to be where the beak meets, is about halfway between the top of the head and where the neck curves in. I'm also going to be looking at other points of interest, so the end of the beak right here, and also this spot on the back of his head here, and the top of his head right here. So these are all points of interest that I want to relate to other parts of the picture as I'm drawing. And what I do is I just make lines in my mind, and I've been doing it for so long that I can do it kind of without making those lines on the paper. But I'm going to show you what that would look like if you did make lines on the paper. So like if I want to get the position of the beak, what I would do is I would draw a straight line of the beak and find out where it meets the end of his head, and then draw that. And I would also draw that up this way, and to find where the eyes are, I would draw lines directly across to see where they meet. So it looks like the top of the eye meets the end of the beak, and the bottom of the eye is right in line right here. So the bottom of the beak. And then I would do the same vertically. So I would draw a line up there. And these are called plumb lines, and it's been a type of drawing for a very, very long time. It's what most artists use and how they draw pieces that look realistic. Okay, so now we can start drawing the actual picture, and I'm going to unselect these plumb lines that I already drew because I'm starting on a new layer. So I want to create a new layer so that I'm not drawing on the same layer as the robin. In this case, it doesn't really matter because they're going to be right next to each other. You can also do this with the image right in front of you. You can do this if you're, in the field and you are maybe doing a plein air exercise. So this really relates to pretty much anything that you're going to draw. And I'm going up to my drawing, I'm going to choose Little Pine, and I'm choosing a kind of light pink color. And what I want to do here is I'm not going to be making any curved shapes like this. Definitely not going to do that. What I'm going to do is be making these broad lines to kind of see where the connections are and to coincide with what I just talked about, which is the plumb lines, and they're very straight. So you're going to be going back in later and doing all your details. So I'm going to start off and I'm just going to draw really basic shapes of where I think he is. And you can see that I'm doing a lot of it in my head, but I'm also doing it on the canvas. So I'm just drawing basic lines and I'm finding about where the lines connect to each other and in relation to other lines. And a lot of this is through practice. It comes a lot more naturally the more you do it. And it's basically the plumb line method. It's a method that a lot of artists use. I think most artists that I know use this method. So the more you do it, the easier it will become. So if you see here, I'm looking at this area on the back of his neck because that looks like a really good, or the back of his head because that looks like a good area to focus on. And if I draw a line straight across, I can see that that goes about halfway down his neck. So if I go back to my drawing and I draw a line straight across, and I know that it's going about halfway down his neck, I can just put this line right here, and that should work out well. And again, I'm not drawing any curved lines. I can go back and do that later. So I'm just finding the general shapes. And if I want to find this area right here, I can also measure these distances, which are about the same. So that would go up to about there. And then to find the top of his beak, I'll draw a line down here, which should connect right about there. And the top of his beak goes almost to the top of his head. And I know out of personal experience that I tend to make beaks too long. I think this is pretty natural, so I'm just gonna remember what I usually do and make the beak a little bit shorter. And I can always go back in later and check. And again, I'm not really doing any curved lines, maybe this one line right here. And I'm also checking these distances to see that the top beak is wider than the bottom beak, so I'm putting that in my drawing as well. And I can also check the end of his beak right here to the top of his head. So we see that that's right about here and where it meets down here. So if I draw a line straight through, I can see that the beak goes all the way to right about here. And I can check it horizontally as well. Now for the eyes, I want to check vertically, so I go all the way up to the top of the head, so it's right about here. And then I want to check the other part. And I can also measure these distances so it's about right in the middle. Of these. So I would say the eye is right near the top of the head. So right about here. And then going horizontally, we can see that the bottom of the eye connects to this area right here, which is the bottom of the beak. And the top of the eye is parallel to the line cutting across. So it's right about in the middle. And we're not going to draw a circle for the eye. We're just going to draw straight lines. And now you pretty much have your basic outline of the image. From here, what you're going to do is go back in and check all of these measurements, check to see that everything is correct. So what I would do is I would check the measurement of, for example, this area as opposed to this area. So you have two areas that are generally the same. So I would just check to make sure that those areas are the same. And it looks like I could probably go out a little bit more on the head. But I think I've got things generally where they need to be. I think maybe the beak could be a little bit smaller. And at this point, you can go back in and add a layer on top of this and then start outlining in a more kind of permanent way. If you were doing this on in traditional media, you would either use like a darker charcoal or an ink over your drawing, or stronger lines in graphite. So I'm just checking to make sure that all these measurements are right. And usually when I'm drawing, I don't draw all of these plumb lines going down because I can see them in my head. And that's just from years of drawing. So I don't want you to do that. I just want you to draw all of these lines as you see them, and just measuring them across. And I'm going pretty fast with this just because I've done this so much. But take as much time as you need and really perfect the measurements, because once you start to draw thicker lines over top of this, you can't really change any of the measurements. It gets a lot harder to change anything in the end stages when you put thicker marks on top. So now what we can do, since this is a digital platform, since we're working in Procreate, we can check if our image is proportionally correct. And I think I made a few mistakes, but to make sure, we're going to just take this layer. So we're taking the layer of the robin and we're going to move him over and just zoom him in until we have him in generally the area that we've drawn in. Now we're going to have some mistakes. So I'm going to center one point of this image. And so this image I'm going to center the top of his head, and I'm going to do everything from there. So every mark that I make is based on the top of his head. And I'm just going to delete these lines over here, just erasing them. So we can see that we have things pretty well lined up. I did a pretty good job. I made the beak too big, as I said that I probably would, because I usually do. So I'm going to create a layer on top of this, and I'm going to draw in a different color. So I'm going to draw in a green, and I'm just going to outline where the drawing is, or where the reference photo is, so that I can go back and compare where I made my marks and how they're different. So I'm just drawing in these basic areas of interest to see if I got those correct on my drawing. And you can see I got the head shape and the width of the head pretty solid. It looks like I'm good there. So I'm just putting in lines where I think I might have made some mistakes. And you don't have to outline the entire image. You're just outlining spots where you think you may have maybe had an off measurement. And this is a great way of checking your work. So the top of the beak, I'm going to go over here. And one thing that's important is to know your weaknesses. So I know that I tend to make things too large. I tend to do this with eyes. I do this with chins for some reason. I don't make my chins long enough. And because I know that I do that, I can use that to my advantage and kind of correct myself as I'm working. So once we have this general outline here of all these spots that we think we may have messed up, I can go back and I can uncheck the reference image. And you can see that I got it pretty well. I did make the beak a little bit too large. So you can see this area right here. At the bottom of the beak, I made that too far out. But everything else is pretty much in the right spot. I think I made the eye a little bit too large. So if I zoom in, this was my original drawing of the eye, this outline right here. And as you can see, the eye is actually a lot smaller than that. So that's one thing that I want to keep in mind, that I need to keep my eyes a little bit smaller. But everything else looks pretty much good. If I wanted to change my drawing, I could always go back to my drawing layer and just erase. My eraser is really big, so I could just erase right here and just make sure that my drawing fits in these bounds. But overall, I did a pretty good job of getting the proportions correct. And this is all thanks to plumb lines, and from everyone who's taught me over the years to use plumb lines rather than shapes, rather than circles or triangles. The other thing that I do is I look at, so if I uncheck this layer and I just sample this color right here and I go back to my drawing layer, the other thing I look at is the negative space. What the negative space is, for example, we have our drawing in the middle, but we also have the spaces where we haven't drawn on the canvas. So for example, this area right here. And I look at these as very simple shapes. So you can see, like, I can make a triangle out of this, and I can also make a triangle out of this. So what I'm doing is finding this line right here and this line right here, and you just picture that in your head and create a negative space. So really all you need to do is find what these two lines look like. And I'll draw it over here. So it just looks like this. And from there, you don't have to draw in, perfect lines for the shape of the neck. You're just drawing the negative space. And that helps a ton, especially if you're working on a really complicated drawing. You can just separate it into planes. For example, on the back of this head, it looks like a straight line going down that way and another straight line going this way. So if you were only to work on this angle right here, which looks like this, you would only have to focus on that particular angle as opposed to the entire head shape. So all of this comes together in a way for you to be able to draw easily, quickly. You really have to practice it a lot though. It took me a pretty long time before I got comfortable with this, but once you get comfortable with it, it's a great way to be able to measure things as you're drawing them and put them on the paper so that they're more realistically represented. So we're jumping forward a little bit. I've been working on this for a while, and what I did to get to this point is I had a reference image of this robin, so I pulled that in and I deleted the one to the left of my drawing and I just put it in a reference image so that I have my canvas just devoted to the drawing. And what I can do from here is I can sample the colors in the image just by touching with my finger on the image, sampling a color, and then drawing that straight on the canvas. So, for example, if I wanted this color right here, kind of the color of his chest, I would just sample that color, and I would probably go to a bigger brush just because I want to get the area all the way in. And I would just continue sampling colors and placing them where my lines say that they are. And from here you can go back in and smudge using the smudge tool. And this is a great way to create kind of like a fur-like effect or feather-like effect. And just do this throughout the entire image. And it's a lot of fun, gets addictive. I did add a background color, so all I did was just sample this color of the background and start painting it. And you can smudge it as well. But this is a great way to practice really creating a representational image of whatever it is you're drawing. And you can always go back and look at your reference on the left to see if you did a good job, if you need to change anything. So for example, I'm zooming in on this reference and I'm finding this spot right here. And I'm going to go back to Little Pine just so that I can make it a little bit smaller. And I'm just drawing in this little nose hole or nostril right here because it didn't look like I drew that in earlier. And I can just sample all the colors around it until I find the exact colors and just draw from there. And when I'm drawing, when I'm painting in Procreate, I'm really just painting basic shapes or basic squiggles because I know that I can go back in later and use my smudge brush to smudge all of this together so it has a more painterly effect. So I hope that helped. I'm going to continue working on this, and if you have any questions, feel free to comment or send me a message, but definitely comment on what you want to see in the future in relation to drawing or painting or just using Procreate, because I want to be able to help you guys figure out this incredible platform. And these are just some examples of how I use it.